So this sets up a real struggle in the nation of the Lamanites in the land of Nephi, because you've got all these newly converted Lamanites, and you've got the hardened Amalekites and Ammonites, and many other Lamanites who weren't converted. And so all of the converted people assemble. It tells us in verse 5 of chapter 24 that they meet first in the land of Midian, and then they come over to the land of Ishmael, where Ammon had begun this missionary effort with King Lamoni. And it's here where we get this incredible speech from the king's son, who is named Anti-Nephi-Lehi, because the king of all the Lamanites has now died in the first few verses of chapter 24. And he gets up and gives this speech saying, we've had some problems that are so big that if we, sitting here in the 21st century, look back in time at the Book of Mormon, what if we looked at it through this lens? What if we said, this is odd that Mormon and Moroni saw our day. They're writing the book predominantly for Lamanites in the latter day and for all people in the latter days. They know what we're struggling with today in our day and age, and one of the major wrestles that we experience culturally, socially, is addiction. There are addictions all over the place in this world today, and yet the word addiction never appears once in the Book of Mormon. I find it interesting to read this story here of these people through the lenses of addiction and overcoming addiction, wrestling with, dealing with addictions. And you might ask, well, how in the world is addiction related here? Well, look at some of the ways that they describe these people. They were a ferocious and a bloodthirsty people who delighted in the shedding of blood. They delighted in warfare and in violence. It's almost like they're addicted to war and to killing and to violence. Something seems to happen to these people when you put a sword or a scimitar or a weapon of some sort in their hand and get them riled up. It's almost like they're addicted to it. And if you read chapter 24 very, very carefully, what we now have through that lens is a handbook for what we might be able to do in the 21st century to wrestle more effectively with addictions, both for ourselves and to help loved ones and family members and associates who are wrestling with addictions. Because you're noticing the way this king is talking about their delight in the shedding of blood. Look at what he says, verse 12. Now, my best beloved brethren, since God hath taken away our stains and our swords have become bright, then let us stain our swords no more with the blood of our brethren. God's wiped our swords clean. They're bright. They're shiny at this point. Let's not pick them up again for fear of what might happen inside of us when we do that, regardless of what our intent for picking it up is, even self-defense, right? And he keeps talking about this washing those swords. Look at verse 15. Oh, how merciful is our God! And now behold, since it has been as much as we could do to get our stains taken away from us and our swords are made bright, let us hide them away that they may be kept bright as a testimony to our God at the last day, or at that day that we shall be brought to stand before him to be judged. So he then invites them to bury their swords, verse 16, deep in the earth. Not just cast them aside, not just put them on a plaque on the wall as a memorial of what our former life used to be, but to absolutely bury them deep. A few years ago, Elder Dale Renland in General Conference quoted the Shakespeare play As You Like It. And in there he talked about these two brothers. In their younger years, one of them was awful to his brother, and Duke Frederick was just terrible. He tried to actually have his brother killed. Many, many years later, he had experienced some things. He had changed. And some people, some women who had known him in his earlier years, recognized him and said, "Wait a minute, aren't you the one who was so cruel and vile and tried to kill your brother?" And Duke Frederick's response is very, very profound as it relates to this story. He said, "'Twas I, but 'tis not I." Brothers and sisters, when dealing with addiction, or when dealing with false tradition, or patterns of negative behaviors and negative relationships, I love that phrase from the pen of William Shakespeare. "'Twas I, but 'tis not I." In other words, we're going to acknowledge the fact that, yeah, we've had struggles, but it doesn't define us today. My present self is not going to be held hostage to my teenage self, or my 20s-something self, or my 30-something self. Nor is my 40-something self going to hold my 60-something self hostage. The story of the gospel of Jesus Christ moving forward in an individual life is the ability to change, the ability to bury some things with the help of the atonement, to not just bury stained swords, but swords that have been made bright. They're shiny when we bury them. We're not burying sin. They've been forgiven. They've worked through a process of conversion and repentance. And now we bury the weapons of our rebellion.